Welcome back to Greek. Today we'll be learning basic conjugation of omega verbs, starting with the present active indicative, then infinitive, and then imperatives. And after we've learned that more grammar-heavy part of the lesson, we'll move on to our first set of vocab words. And then, because in next week's lesson we'll be starting to learn first declension, our teaser at the end of this week's lesson will be translating a sentence with both a verb form that we've learned this week and a noun form we'll be learning next week. So, let's get into it. I'm not going to spend that much time going over the basics of how conjugating verbs works in general because in Greek the process is largely similar to Latin, and there are also certain things you don't need to know for a while, so I just want to jump right in by going through the present active indicative endings for omega verbs. And if you still are confused about what conjugating verbs even means, or you don't really understand the concept of adding endings to a word or something, anything like that, you can still contact me anytime. Again, my contact information is in the syllabus, which is linked down below in the description. But back to the endings. Okay, just like in Latin, we're going to organize our chart into first, second, and third persons, and then singular and plural. So your first person singular ending is omega, so O. Second person singular is epsilon, iota, sigma, so ace. And notice that we're using this sigma rather than this one. And that's because the sigma is appearing at the end of the word, whereas we would be using this sigma if that sigma were at the start of a word or at the beginning of, at the start of a word or in the middle of a word. But because these are endings, the sigma is the last letter in the word, and that's why it's okay to use the more S-looking one. Okay, your third person singular ending is A, epsilon, iota. And now on to plural. Your first person plural ending is omicron, mu, epsilon, nu, which is amen. Then second person plural is epsilon, tau, epsilon, which is ete. And then third person plural is omicron, upsilon, sigma, iota, so usi. And this form has what's called a removable nu, so I'm going to show that with parentheses around the nu. And this nu appears in the ending when the verb with this ending is immediately followed by a word that begins with a vowel. But no nu appears when the next word begins with a consonant. So you can remember this by thinking of the use of a versus an in English. So like we'd say a castle, but an elephant, for example. And that's not exactly equivalent, but I think it's a quick, easy way to remember whether or not to add that nu to your ending. Well, now that we've learned these endings, we need somewhere to put them. And that somewhere is going to be the present stem of verbs. So these verbs we're working with right now are called omega conjugation because the first person singular present active indicative form ends in, yes, an omega. And so to find the present stem of a verb, we're just going to pop off that omega. So we're using fulato here as the example, and just like I said, we're just going to take off the omega on the end, and we end up with fulat as our stem. And now we can add on whatever endings we've learned today to this stem and produce verb forms. And our next verb form is the infinitive. And if you remember at the end of our last lesson video on accents, the teaser was forming the present active infinitive of the verb spoudo. And if you don't remember that, maybe you should go back and watch that lesson video because it's got a lot of important info in it. And if you do remember though, then kudos to you, you learned something again. And now we can just do a little refresher. So to form a present active infinitive, we're going to take the stem of a verb, so we're going to keep using fulato, And then you're going to add the ending epsilon iota nu. So we'll take the stem, which we learned take off the omega, so we get fulot, and then we're adding epsilon iota nu. And you get fulotane. And that's the infinitive. And you might be wondering where the accents are in all of this, and don't worry, because I know you're really missing them right now. We are going to add them on later, but I'm saving them until we've learned all the endings for today. But we will get to them. And speaking of those endings we're learning, the last ones we're going to be learning are our present active imperatives. So Greek does something cool that's somewhat different from Latin in that you have both a second and third person imperative. So the second person imperatives, for which the endings are epsilon, I'm going to use black again. Epsilon in the singular, and epsilon tau epsilon, which you might notice is exactly the same as the indicative second person plural ending. Anyways, we won't worry about that right now. So these two, and ete, are what we would consider our normal imperatives. They're used to give a command to someone. And the third person imperatives, for which the endings are eto, so epsilon, tau, omega, and ontone, omicron, nu, tau, omega, nu, are used to address one or more people who are neither the speaker nor the person or people being spoken to. There's not an exact equivalent for this in English, so the closest we can get is by translating these as let. And this will make a lot more sense when we practice using these endings and the ones we learned earlier in the lesson to form and translate verbs from this week's vocab list. So we'll do practice with these endings now. Okay, we're going to use two verbs for practice. The first is klepto, which means to steal. And so yeah, let's get into it. Okay, klepto in the indicative. First person singular, we learned our ending was O, omega, so we're going to add that to our stem. And we learned our stem is the part of the word that comes before that omega, because we just need to take off that omega to find the stem. Okay, so our first person singular present active indicative of klepto is klepto. And because it's two syllables, it's pretty easy to figure out where the accent's going to go. But let's just go through our process as usual, as if we didn't know. So you put your acute on the omega, and then you see, is the final syllable, the ultima, long or short? And here, because the final syllable has this omega, the long O sound, we know that the ultima is long. So we can move this accent, this acute, back one space. Whereas if it had been short, we would be able to move back the acute 2 spaces. I don't know why I wasn't cooperating, but okay. There we go. So that is our fully accented, fully formed, first person singular, present active indicative of klepto. Your second person singular is the ace ending, so klept, our stem, and then epsilon, iota, sigma. And now we're going to use the same process of figuring out where our accent's going to go. So we put the acute on our ultima, and we're putting it on the iota here because this is a proper diphthong, and so we put the accent on the second vowel in the diphthong. Okay, so the ultima here is long because, like I said, we have a diphthong. So we'll move this acute back. Why is it not cooperating? Oh no. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to draw it again. We'll move the acute back one space. So it's on the first epsilon in the word. Now for third person singular, the ending was A, so we get klepte. And again, we have that diphthong on the end, right, with the epsilon iota. And so we can move back that acute one syllable. You know, I give up. Okay, there we go. All right, our plural endings. So in the first person plural, we have the ending amen. So klept, our stem. And then amen, so omicron, mu, epsilon, nu. And here we have an epsilon in our ultima. So the epsilon is short, right? Which means that when we have our acute here, we can move the acute back 2 spaces, 2 syllables. Okay, so, now it works. 1, 2. So we put our accent on the first syllable in kleptomen. And then second person plural, we had the ete ending. So we get klept, our stem, and then epsilon, tau, epsilon as our ending. We put the acute on our final syllable because that epsilon is short again. We take that acute and go back 1, 2 spaces to the antepenult. And now we're on to our last form. First, third person plural, present active indicative. So klept, our stem again. Isn't that nice how it's always the same? Okay, klept, and then we add usi. Omicron, upsilon, sigma, iota. And remember that there's a nu in parentheses there in case the word following this verb starts with a vowel. Okay, so here we're going to put our accent right there. Oh, that is so long. Okay, our acute on our ultima, and we're going to push it back 2 spaces because this iota is short. That's just something you have to know. Okay, you know what? It's not cooperating again. Okay, we know that the imaginary acute is on that iota, and we're going to move back 1, 2 syllables. So we end up with the acute on the epsilon. And that is it for your present active indicative. And on to the infinitive. So we take our stem again, klept, and we add our infinitive ending, which we learned is ein, epsilon, iota, nu. And because this diphthong here is in the ultima, we know our ultima is long, and so we do not keep our acute on the ultima, we move it back to the penult. Okay, on to the imperative. Second person singular, we put our stem, klept, and then you add your ending. So for the second person singular imperative, it's epsilon. And this epsilon is short, so our ultima is short, so our acute does not stay there. It tries to go back 2 spaces. Oh my goodness. It tries to go back 2 spaces, but there aren't 2 spaces to go back to, so it only goes back 1. Okay, let's do our second person plural, just so we can group those together. So our second person plural, we take our stem again. Oh, I just wrote a normal L. Okay, klept, and then we add our ending, which is ete. Another way you could remember this, if it helps you, is to think of the second person plural imperative as the singular plus te, sort of like in Latin. So if you take the verb laudo in Latin, to praise, if you form the singular imperative, you get lauda. But when you form the plural, you just add that te onto the end, you get laudate. If that helps you in Greek to remember that this is a similar situation, then go for it. But otherwise, just remember it's ete versus e in the plural and singular. Okay, let's put our accent on. Okay, so we put the accent on the we put the acute on the ultima, and then because the ultima is short, we have that short epsilon, we are going to move it back 2 spaces, so 1, 2 syllables back, and we get it on the antepenult. Okay, so there we go. That is our second person imperatives. And on to third person. So third person singular for klepto, we have klept again as our stem, and then we add our ending. So we get eto, epsilon tau omega, and because that omega is long, so we're matching our accent here, we know that we can only move that accent back 1 space. So it ends up on the penult. Okay, and then for our third person plural, we take our stem, klept, and then we add the ending on tone, omicron nu, tau, omega, nu. And we're going to put our acute on the ultima to begin with, and because the ultima is long because of that omega, we move the acute back. We move the acute back 1 syllable. There we go. So there we have formed everything we need to know for now for the verb klepto. And now for our second example, we're going to be using paideuo, which means to teach. And with this one, we are going to be translating each form as we go to solidify our understanding of translation. So first person singular, present active indicative of paideuo, to teach, is just paideuo. So we'll write it. Paideuo. To place our accent, we're going to put the acute on the ultima again. And notice this one can be a little bit tricky, and that's why I picked it, because, so let's split our syllables. So paideuo. I know it can be confusing to have 3 vowels in a row, but because the O is a diphthong, we consider that as one sound, or one part. It's not eo as one big thing. It's 2 separate syllables, and yet not 3, which is what I don't want you to get confused with just because there are 3 vowels. So I think this will make more sense once we try to actually move the accent. So right now our acute is on our ultima, and the ultima is long, like I said. So we're going to move back the acute 1 syllable. And because the O is a proper diphthong, we place the acute on the second vowel in the diphthong, so that's upsilon. But once I remove these lines here, it can look confusing, I know, because if I take away that accent, it's like there are a few vowels in a row, and you might be thinking, okay, I know that the omega is long, so I know that our ultima is long, so I'm going to move back my acute 1 space. And you might be grouping all those vowels together. So if you do, then you might think, okay, this is all 1 syllable. So I'm going to move back 1 space, and you got the whole thing right. You were like, okay, I, proper diphthong, and I'm going to put my accent on the iota. That would normally be fine if this word weren't what it is. And so we just move back 1 space. I think it also helps to say it because it's paideuo. So paideuo, there's 3 syllables, and you just move back 1 space based on what you say and what you hear. Okay, on to second person singular. Paideu, because that's our stem, right? We just take off that omega. Paideu, and then ace. And because that ace is long, we move back our acute 1 syllable. Okay, and then on to our next form. Third person singular, paideuwe, right? Because we add that epsilon iota ending to the end. So here's our stem, paideu, and then we add a. And we take our acute here. We see that that a is long, move back one syllable. This is another place where I'm saying it can be kind of hard to keep track of all these different vowels and where they fit in, but I think pronouncing this word will really help you out here, because otherwise it's like, eh. So just figure it out based on saying the word and using your knowledge of diphthongs and how they work. Okay, first person plural is the amen ending, so paido, and then amen. And we take our acute on our final syllable. Because that epsilon's short, we move back 2 syllables, and we get to the upsilon. So again, another bit of a tricky vowel situation there, but again, just pronouncing, thinking about diphthongs, how they work, that'll really help you out. Okay, our second person plural, paido, and then we add our ending, ete, so epsilon, tau, epsilon. Put our acute on the final syllable. Take that acute and move back 2 syllables to that upsilon there in the L diphthong. Now onto our final form. Paido, and then usi. And remember, there's that removable nu at the end. And we put that acute on the ultima, and then because the iota there is short, we'll move back 2 syllables. So 1, 2, paido, usi. All right, now let's translate. So let's just go through each one. Paideo, I teach. Paidoes, you teach. Paidoe, he, she, or I guess it teaches. Paidoamen, we teach. Paidoete, y'all teach, or you, plural, teach, however you like to think about it. And then paidousi, they teach, or usin. Okay, on to infinitive. So we take our stem again, the paido, and then we're going to add our ending ain. Ain. So we put our acute on the ultima. The ultima here is long because we have that A diphthong. Now we move that acute back 1 syllable. Paideoin. Okay, and that means to teach. And in Greek, actually, the infinitives aren't exactly like how we translate them in English or translate them from Latin into English. They're not simply the to something. They have a different sense often, but I personally think it is totally acceptable for a beginning Greek class to just understand that it's to something. And if you're curious how else it can be used, ask me, I'll explain it. But all we need to know is to verb. So, paideoin, to teach. And on to our imperatives. So second person singular, we take our stem, paido, and we add our ending, e. So we have paideoe, and we take the acute, put it on our ultima. We see the ultima is short because it's just that epsilon, which is short. Move back 2 syllables, so 1, 2. Onto that iota because I is a proper diphthong. So we're putting the acute on the second vowel in the diphthong, and we get paidoe. Onto the plural. So paido. And our ending is ete, the same as the second plural present active indicative. So epsilon, tau, epsilon. Put our acute on the ultima. And then move back 2 syllables because we know that that epsilon there is short, makes the ultima short. And we get paidoete. Or paidoete. Okay, third person singular present active imperative, paideo, and then we add our ending, eto. Man, I'm really not doing great with sticking inside the lines, but that's okay. Okay, we're going to put our acute on that final syllable, and because we're ending with an omega, we know that the ultima is long, so we can only move back the acute one syllable. So it ends up on that epsilon right there. So we get paidoeto. And then the plural. So paideo, and then we put on our omicron, nu, tau, omega, nu. Put our acute on the ultima. We see that the ultima is long because of that omega, and we move back the acute one syllable. Okay, and now let's translate these. So paidewe is teach to one person. Paidewete is teach to many people. I'm not saying teach to someone. I don't know how to distinguish this without you seeing me, because I feel like I can act it out to explain. Teach, and I'm speaking to someone. I'm not saying teach to a person. Like, I'm not telling you to teach someone else, if that makes sense. Okay, I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, ask me. But yeah, teach, a command. Okay. Now, third singular imperative is translated, like we said, as let. So this would be let him teach or let her teach. And then our plural, just like a normal third person plural, we're going to use they. So let them teach. And that's all the practice we're going to do in this video for conjugating verbs, but we're going to have a bunch more examples in the worksheet for today, which is linked down below. So make sure to check that out for some extra practice. And now that we've covered all the grammar of this lesson, we're going to be going through our first vocab set. And all of these words will be in a vocab list, which is also linked below. And I'm just going to include that with the worksheet, like in one document, so you'll get your practice, and then if you keep scrolling down the document, all of your vocab words will be right there too. But I still want to go through them briefly here. Okay, so we have 10 verbs that we're learning this week. The first is grapho, which means to write. You might recognize this word in autograph, for example. And then the next word is ethelo, which we've worked with before. It takes an infinitive and means be willing or to wish. And the way that this works, if you're unfamiliar with how plus infinitive works, is that you would see something like ethelo and then an infinitive form. So that would be I wish to something, and the to something is whatever that infinitive verb means. So if we had ethelo paidewein, which we just worked with up here, paidewein, then it would be I wish to teach. Okay, our next word is thuo, which means to offer sacrifice, or slay. Classics word. Of course, Greek is going to be a lot of the same with slaying and death and gods and voyages and whatever. It's a lot of the same vocab as Latin. Okay, our next word is klepto, which we just worked with too, which I said means to steal. You might recognize that word like in kleptomania, anything like that. Okay, our next word is paideo, which we also just worked with, which, like I said, means to teach. And then our next word is spodo, which also takes an infinitive, like ethelo earlier, and means to hasten, strive, or be eager. And when I give these different options for vocab, sometimes it makes more sense to use one definition over another in context based on the sentence. It's really also personal preference at times, so You do you, really. Okay, our next word is fulato, which means to stand guard, protect, or preserve, and that's actually the word we're going to be using in the teaser in just a little bit. Okay, our next word is akuo, which takes a genitive or accusative and means to hear, listen, or listen to. And don't really worry too much about the genitive versus accusative thing for now, like when to use which one. You'll start out by seeing the akuo in a sentence, and the form of the noun following it will either be in genitive or accusative. Don't worry about why it's in one or the other for a while. Okay, next word, balo, which means to throw, hit, or shoot. And then our last word is luo, which means to loosen, release, or destroy. And if you're one of those people who uses derivatives to help solidify your vocab knowledge, you're totally welcome to do that. There are tons of great Greek derivatives, study guides, and sets out there. And if you have any suggestions, feel free to send them to me, and then I can post about them on here and more people can see them. And I'll also look for some myself and give recommendations, but I personally just like to learn the straight vocab and learn the derivatives kind of naturally. But if it really helps you to use the derivatives to remember the vocab, you're welcome to do that. Okay, and those are our verbs. And then we have three adverbs that we're going to be learning. And this is where I would like to return to the idea of identical endings from earlier, because you might be like, didn't you say the second person plural present active indicative form has the same ending as the second person plural present active imperative form? So how would we be able to tell them apart? And a really nice way to tell them apart, if the sentence has one of these, is these negative adverbs, not kai. Here. Okay, I'm just going to move this out of the way for now. But these, may and u, both mean not. But may is used with an imperative, and u is used with an indicative. So if you were to see may and then a verb that ends in ete, you would know that that verb has to be an imperative. I mean, if there are other verbs in the sentence, it can get a little bit confusing, but if you just have a simple sentence, just one verb, and you have that may, you know that that verb has to be an imperative, not the indicative, if you're seeing that ete ending. Whereas if you had u and that same exact verb form with the ete, you know that that verb is an indicative. So rather than being a command, like you all do something, it's just you all are doing something, or technically you all are not doing something because these are negative. And you might be wondering about these forms right here, ook and uch. Those are used when the word following this adverb begins with a vowel. So ook is used when the word following this adverb begins with smooth breathing. And uch is used when the word following this adverb begins with rough breathing. But if the word following the adverb begins with a consonant, you just use u. If that's still a little bit confusing, then again, ask me or just try it out for yourself, and I think it'll start to make some sense. Okay, our last adverb is kai, which also happens to be the conjunction we're learning. And kai as an adverb means also or even. And I think this will be easier once we learn what it means as a conjunction. So, as a conjunction, kai means and kai as a correlative means both and. And if you don't know what a correlative is, that's where you have these two words that are linked, regardless of whatever words come in between. So you'd see this in a sentence. So you'd see Kai, blah, 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 Kai, blah, 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 and that means both blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. I think that makes sense. If it doesn't, just understand that in a sentence you're not actually going to see that ellipsis. It's both and then a bunch of words, and then then a bunch of words. So this, I think, is really easy to understand once you think about the word et in Latin. So we know et means and. And some of you may know that et can also be an adverb, and when it's an adverb, it means also or even, just like Kai. And so when we're thinking about whether Kai is being used as an adverb or a conjunction in a sentence, a lot of times we can use common sense and context, although I know Dr. J will not be very happy about me saying that. It's true. You will see a word, Kai, another word. That's probably a couple nouns or a couple adjectives being grouped together so that you can just connect them rather than being even, if that makes sense. So it's really a lot about what makes more sense in the moment or in the sentence, however you think is best to translate Kai. So you make the call a lot of times whether Kai is being used as an adverb or a conjunction, but I do think it makes sense, especially with practice. Okay, the last thing I want to draw your attention to in this, and then I promise we'll be done with the actual lesson content for today, is the accent on this first Kai in the correlative pair. So you see that accent there, right here, is a grav. And you might be wondering, why is one Kai with an acute and the other with a grav, especially when we see the dictionary entry of Kai has an acute? Well, remember what we learned about gravs. They're going to appear on the ultima if that word initially had an acute, but it's followed by another word with no punctuation in between them. So when you're using a correlative, you know that there's going to be words in between, right? So that first Kai has to be followed by some words, otherwise that ellipsis wouldn't be there. And generally, Kai isn't really going to show up at the end of your sentence, right? If you're using it as and, especially, you're not going to see blah, 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 and, period. That's not going to happen, really. So you know that this Kai is going to be followed by something, and really likely, this Kai is going to be followed by something too, because I doubt you're going to see both blah, 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 and, period. You're going to see both something and something. So in all likelihood, this acute here is going to flip to a grav too. And the same is true of these Kais, even though it's all the same word. Your Kai being used as an adverb, if it's followed by another word, you're going to flip that acute to be a grav. So it'll look exactly like this Kai. And the same is true when Kai is being used as a simple conjunction, just meaning and. That acute is going to flip to a grav. Just the same accent rules we learned last week. And if that still feels a little bit tricky, go back to last week's video. Accents are really something you have to practice to understand. Okay, and that's it for the actual lesson. Now onto our really brief teaser. Okay, so based on everything we've learned, what is the one word we don't recognize? This one, right? Because we just learned me, and then we learned fulato, in this case fulate, and then there's this mystery word. Well, I'll tell you now, this word is a noun. And let's figure out what this would sound like just based on our alphabetical knowledge. So this is a sigma, right? So s, then kappa, so k. So we have sk now. And then this is an eta, right? So we have an A sound, so ske, and then a nu, then an eta, and then another nu. So we end up with skein-ein. So skein-ein is a noun, and in this form, it's accusative, but the nominative form of the word skene, so it just looks like this without the new, and means tent. So now let's translate this lovely sentence. Me, we learned, is the negative adverb, meaning not, and it's used with what? Imperative or indicative? Quick little quiz. Imperative. If you got that right, great job. If you didn't, that's okay. Me, not, and then fulate, well, we recognize that form as the second person singular present active imperative because of that epsilon ending. So we know that fulato means guard or protect. So we'll use guard here. So may, not or do not, fulate, guard, skenen, the tent. And as I said before, this eta new ending is the accusative form of this word skene, and that is going to be the accusative form for eta stem first declension nouns. That's just a fun little teaser. Now you know one ending in the first declension, and I promise you in the next lesson video we'll be learning a lot more endings. And yeah, then we can start translating more sentences like this with great translations like don't guard the tent, and it'll be a lot of fun. I cannot wait. And remember, check out the practice worksheet down below. The vocab list is there too. Contact me if you have any questions. It's all in the syllabus. I'm so happy that you're all listening and excited to do this. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye!